All right, so hello and welcome back. So today we are talking about why were Korean soldiers so feared in the Vietnam War. As a military historian, I know a lot about the subject, mostly because focused on it, and I had one of the best teachers or professors really on it, and he also served during this conflict. So I will try and give you my opinion on it and see if there's anything they missed, what they probably didn't. Again, there are videos in the description. My stuff's there if you'd like. Otherwise, let's get to it.
Why were Korean soldiers so feared in the Vietnam War? Under the cover of the Many Flags campaign, the United States war effort in Vietnam was supported by 5 allied countries. These were Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Thailand, and the Philippines.
And that is not talked about nearly enough. Even in my class, we went over this, but it was very again. Australia and New Zealand were there. Australia contributed quite a significant amount, actually. Britain was not because they did not want to get involved. South Korea was involved, and the Philippines and Thailand too.
By far, the largest contingent was sent by the Republic of Korea. At one point, in the late stage of the war, there were more Koreans in Vietnam than Americans. During the 8 years of their deployment in Vietnam, Koreans fought bravely and left a remarkable impression, so remarkable that their enemies feared them and their allies awed them. Being one of the closest allies of the United States in Asia, South Korea was willing to repay the Americans for the help given to them during the Korean War. Already in 1954 and 1961, South Korea had offered to send its troops to Vietnam to help defeat the Communists. On both occasions, the Americans and South Vietnamese had refused the offer. 10 years later, however, amidst the need for growing foreign participation, the United States and its allies put the proposal on the table for Korea to enter the war.
So in '54, technically the war was still being fought. So South Vietnam was still in North Vietnam, and the French at this time, it's called French Indochina, were technically still fighting the Viet Cong and the NVA at this time, I believe. And the French weren't exactly winning. But again, and then in '61, again, United States troops still weren't really there. We had special forces guys there, but we didn't have big army guys there until around 65, 66 is when the United States started to actually put boots on the ground in Vietnam. So again, it actually makes sense that we would be like, yeah, we don't need your help yet, but you know.
After a series of negotiations held between the United States and South Korean administrations, the agreement was made for South Korea to send its armed forces to South Vietnam under the following terms. The United States forces in Korea would remain in the same number to prevent a threat from North Korea. The United States would support the modernization of the South Korean army, and the United States would finance all expenses of Korean troops in Vietnam, including transportation, equipment, and allowances. Apart from this, the U.S. government agreed to increase the amount of financial help to the rising Korean industry and economy.
So let's think about this deal for Korea, just Korea, okay? They are offering to send troops to Vietnam, okay? In return, they ask for economic support, okay, in their actual country. They ask for a modernization of their entire army, or whatever's being sent. They then ask for the United States to pay for everything that they are doing for their soldiers. And then they request the U.S. to keep the troops that are currently in South Korea on the 38th parallel to be stationed there and not, taken away. Now, this is all very reasonable to the United States because we don't want to keep losing our own people. Very selfish when you think of it like that, but it is the truth. And we get their troops for basically money. And they get combat experience, basically a vice versa kind of thing. But again, it's very important that we didn't withdraw troops from the 38th parallel. And it's because we still had a presence everywhere. Even though the United States was still fighting in Vietnam, we still had guys in West Germany. We still had guys in Korea. We still have people in Japan. We still have our whole Navy out there. Again, the guys that went to Vietnam was the main focus, but we still had armed forces everywhere.
After the Korean National Assembly authorized the campaign on May 21, 1964, Korean units began to arrive in South Vietnam. The forerunner of the armed forces was the military assistance group that the Korean government deployed in late 1964. It consisted of a mobile army surgical hospital, a taekwondo team, and an engineer construction group. Focused primarily on reconstruction, medical aid, and counterinsurgency efforts, this group was popularly known as the Dove Unit. The 1st Korean Combat.
So those are all support units. And again, this was sent in 64 because they're ramping up to send actual guys. Now, again, those might not seem very important, but it's not insignificant support, especially for counterinsurgency, which is what we were still doing in around 64.
Unit to arrive in Vietnam was the Capital Division, better known as Mango, the Tiger Division. The Tiger Division was one of the most famous units in the entire South Korean army. The division that came to Vietnam consisted of only 2 brigades, as 1 brigade remained in Korea for reasons of national security. The Tigers arrived.
A brigade is around 3,000 to 6,000, maybe 9,000 people, so it's pretty big sized unit. And again, the numbers vary wildly. I can't give you an exact estimate because again, every country has different sizes for the brigades and regiments and stuff.
Arrived in Vietnam in September 1965 and were deployed to the Quien Nhân region, replacing the American 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division. Their task was to protect the vital routes 1 and 19.
So they were replacing 101st Airborne Brigade. So depending on how you think about it, airborne troops are slightly better than regular infantry because they were technically lighter. It's a whole thing you go on, but just know that they are slightly better than regular infantry, especially during this time. Maybe not today, but especially in this time. So they're replacing a semi-elite unit out there.
Better known to its allies as the Blue Dragons Division, the 2nd Marine Division arrived in Vietnam at the same time as the Tiger Division. They were initially deployed to Cam Ranh Bay, but subsequently moved to the Duy Hoa area, where they faced the 95th Regiment of the North Vietnamese Army. The largest Korean unit to arrive in South Vietnam was the 9th Infantry Division, the White Horse Division. The division arrived in September 1966 as part of the new agreement for sending additional Korean troops to South Vietnam.
So let's think about this. They sent 9th Division. Okay, division can be around 30,000 people at max, something, and then up down. So they sent 9th Division White Tiger, I think. And then they send the 2nd Marine Division, and then they have 2 brigades of the Capital Division. So this is quite a significant amount of people that are in Vietnam from Korea.
Consisting of an armored company, a reconnaissance company, an engineering battalion, 4 field artillery battalions, and 3 infantry regiments, the division counted 23,865 men.
So yeah, again, 23,000, again, 30,000 down for division. Again, every number varies, but yeah, that's generally. So that's around, going off that number is around 50,000, 55,000 people in country from Korea. That's a lot of men.
The unit was deployed in the Ninh Hoa district at the junction of Route 1 and Route 21, with the task of controlling the local population and defending the Ninh Hoa Air Base in Cam Ranh Bay. By the end of the war, South Korea deployed 2 more units, a Marine battalion that arrived in 1967 and a 12-man C-46 crew in 1969.
Okay, so a battalion is around 500 more. So yeah, again, quite a significant amount of South Koreans are fighting in Vietnam.
In total, the Republic of Korea deployed 47,872 men to Vietnam between 1964 and 1969. All deployed units were under the command of Major General Chae Myung-shin. Once the 9th Infantry Division arrived in Vietnam, General Chae gathered all his units under the command of the Corps headquarters in Nha Trang. The recruitment for the Vietnam tours was made strictly on a voluntary basis. The Capital Division was a reserve division, but was filled up by volunteers from the entire army. South Korean commanders were able to carefully pick candidates as the number of volunteers largely exceeded the volume of the division.
So let's think about this. The United States has a draft at this time because we never got rid of it after World War II. The Koreans are all volunteer, which means every single one of them volunteer to go there. And they had to volunteer from the army to be in the unit that goes to Korea, which means they volunteered and again, they basically really wanted to go. And that's 46,000, I believe they said, people, all volunteers. Now, this is important for Vietnam because all volunteer forces, if we look at special forces, so Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Rangers, MACVs, SOG, all of those guys are very effective in Vietnam. Even the MAC teams, which were semi-special forces, again, it's a little difficult, but basically deployed to help villages build up stuff, but they weren't Green Berets. But all those guys, volunteers, the ability to basically just sustain yourself. Think about it. If you don't want to be there, you don't want to take risks, you don't want to go find the enemy, you just kind of want to sit there, do your time, and get the hell out. Okay, if you're a conscript. If you're a volunteer, well, you want to do this. You know what to do. You know what the job is. You want to fight the enemy. You want to kill the enemy. You want to do whatever it takes to win. That mindset might not seem significant, but it is very significant when you're fighting a counterinsurgency. Again, the USA learns this after Vietnam. We go to an all professional army, and it's the best thing we basically have ever done. Most generals would say it's the best thing we've done so far for the army, and basically the whole military entirely.
This was the first international engagement of the South Korean Army, and everything had to be up to the highest standard. Only those of the best fitness, skills, and discipline were chosen. Once recruitment was over, the Tiger Division was filled with the best South Korea had. The command cadre was also the best the Army could offer. Hand-picked by senior commanders, the cream of the crop of the Korean Military Academy were chosen for the mission.
Now that is very important too. Not only do you have some of the best troops that are all volunteers, you also have them being led by the cream of the crop of the officer corps. Not just random officers like General Westmoreland, which we'll get to later, probably. But you have the best of the best and the cream of the crop leading these guys. That's really going to be a very effective combination. Even just whatever you do, that's going to be a very effective combination.
They were put under the guidance of battle-hardened senior officers, veterans of the Korean War. American soldiers and officers had only words of praise for their Korean allies. The Korean Army had come a long way since the Korean War, when they were still learning from the American military. In Vietnam, Koreans were completely independent, showing great skill in all aspects of warfare from tactics to logistics. Back home, South Koreans were trained to defend their country from potential invasions from the north. The Americans believed that they would take the same stance in Vietnam as well, so it was a complete surprise when they showed a high level of aggressiveness in searching for and fighting the enemy. The South Korean soldiers were very thorough in their search and destroy missions. They would scan the designated area, leaving no rock unturned.
So, again, what the Americans probably were thinking, I don't know their mindset, but again, probably, is that technically this was a defensive army for South Korea. It wasn't meant to be used offensively. So they were very thrown off when the unit actually went out and basically did their job for counterinsurgency, which is go on the offensive, instead of basically sit around. Let's just put it this way. American thinking in the 60s was not very high of minorities. You can probably figure out why. With the Civil Rights Act and everything that was happening in the USA, we didn't treat really anybody that was white very fondly, let's put it that way.
Once the enemy was located, Korean soldiers would encircle them, slowly closing in and leaving very little space for the enemy to slip through. The success of the missions largely depended on discipline. After spending the day fighting against the enemy, Korean soldiers would stand waist deep in the water at night to close off their perimeter. The Korean troops attacked their enemies with everything they had. Although they did not kill as many as the American soldiers, the count of weapons and material they captured was much higher. They did their best to ensure that each of their attacks was a complete blow for the enemy.
And this is important to remember. Technically, the USA probably got a higher body count, whole different video. That's the misleading numbers. We made up mostly. But yeah. Again, there were more U.S. troops in Vietnam, so that's one of the reasons we probably got a higher kill count. But yeah, if Korea is getting a better weapon seizure rate, that's really what you need for counterinsurgency to actually work. You need to take their weapons out. You need to do everything, and killing them is nice, but they can get more fighters. But if you take out their infrastructure and their ability to train new guys, equip them, and all of that, that hurts a lot more.
Whilst keeping their own casualty rate far below average. It was not unusual for Korean units to have a kill ratio of more than 20-1 on their missions. For these reasons, the Americans leaned heavily on their Korean allies in performing dangerous missions. In February 1967, the 11th Company of the Blue Dragon Brigade suffered a night attack from 2 Viet Cong regiments in their base near the Gia Binh village in the Quang Ngai province in South Vietnam.
Okay, a company is at max 128 people versus 2 regiments, which is each a maximum of 3,000. That's insane when you think about the numbers there.
Surrounded with barbed wire and claymore mines, housed with ready-to-fight-to-the-death Koreans, the base was attacked from all sides. As usual, The VC attacked in waves supported by strong mortar fire. Masses of charging VC soldiers did not frighten the Korean Marines, who fired back with every weapon they had. Bullets rained on the charging enemy. The Marines even fired mortar shells at point-blank range. Nonetheless, the Viet Cong broke into the base and the fight turned into hand-to-hand combat. Base commander Captain Chong Kyung-gin ordered his men to pull back to lure the VC deep into the base. Then, he sent 2 squads to seal the gap from which the Viet Cong entered and trap the enemy. The Koreans charged at the enemy with their bayonets. By morning, Korean Marines had pushed the enemy back to the jungle.
And again, I don't know the actual battle situation there, but probably pulling back means he couldn't hold his actual outer perimeter. So instead, if he's going to fall back, he's going to fall back to a center where he can defend better. Then cut out. Then the enemy's going to come in. He'll cut them off, and then fight out that way with a bayonet charge.
After the air was cleared, there were 254 bodies of Viet Cong lying all over the place. Only 15 Korean soldiers had been killed. For this battle, the Korean government awarded more decorations than for any other battle the Korean army had participated in. For their heroism shown in battle, the entire unit was promoted a rank.
That's fucking crazy. So around 250 Viet Cong die for 15. Yeah, again, very motivated, very well-disciplined troops can perform miracles like this.
The vehement performance of South Korean troops, however, left a stain on their service in Vietnam. Korean soldiers often attacked villages that were suspected to provide cover and supplies to insurgents. Showing no mercy, Korean soldiers were known to commit several massacres of Vietnamese civilians, about which numerous reports were made. Despite all the reports, these crimes were tolerated by Korean HQ and American commanders as well. In 1970, U.S. troops gradually began to withdraw from South Vietnam.
So, again, not going to defend this. The USDA did this too. When you're fighting a counterinsurgency, this thing does happen. And you best try to limit it, because every time you do this and you kill people and innocents, all you're doing is fueling the insurgency even more. That makes them fight harder, obviously.
HQ and American commanders as well. In 1970, U.S. troops gradually began to withdraw from South Vietnam. As the number of American soldiers in the country decreased, Korean troops more or less maintained the strength of their forces. It was only after the Paris Peace Agreement was signed in 1973 that the entire South Korean contingent left Vietnam with the rest of the foreign troops.
So the Paris Peace Accord basically was the USA bowing out of this war completely. They signed whatever it took to get out for North Vietnam. To basically, all they really wanted was for North Vietnam to get a peace treaty with South Vietnam. And, well, the USA basically just abandoned South Korea in that, or South Vietnam in that. North Vietnam got to keep all the occupied territory it had in South Vietnam and got to keep it. So they could use it for staging operations and a whole wazoo of everything. So then they would try a failed invasion in 74, I think, and then in 75 it's fucking over. But yeah, it was basically over as soon as the Paris Peace Accords took into effect. But yeah, I like this video. Very good. Summarizes a lot of history of the Korean soldiers. And again, also highlights that Vietnam wasn't just fought by America versus, the Vietnamese. It was fought by America and our allies versus Vietnamese or North Vietnamese, having all of them. So, I hope I brought some insight to that. Otherwise, leave a like. Go check out the original video down there. Otherwise, I will see people next time.